The message came on a Tuesday. All across Earth, every screen flickered to the same image. A group of beings that clearly weren't human. Some had too many eyes. Others had skin that shimmered like oil on water. A few looked almost human, except for small details that made them more wrong than if they'd had tentacles. Commander Jack Miller watched from the Pentagon's main control room, his coffee forgotten in his hand. 20 years in the military hadn't prepared him for this. "We are the Galactic Council," said the alien in the center. Its voice was oddly smooth, like it had studied human speech for years. "We have watched your world for some time. You have reached the point where we must make contact." The alien paused, its 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "You may join our community of worlds, or you may remain alone. The choice is yours, but it must be made now." Within hours, Miller found himself on a transport plane headed to the United Nations. As Earth's leading military strategist, his presence had been requested at the emergency meeting with the aliens who had landed their ship in the middle of Central Park. "They could have appeared anywhere," said General Porter, who sat across from Miller on the plane. "Why New York?" Miller stared out the window. "They wanted to make a point. They know our power structures." The meeting room at the UN felt too small for what was happening. Miller sat 3 seats away from the Secretary General, watching as the alien delegation entered. They moved with strange grace, as if gravity didn't quite affect them the same way. The lead alien, who called itself Ambassador Trell, stood at the center of the room. It was tall and thin, with skin like polished bronze and those unsettling 4 eyes. "The Galactic Council has maintained peace across 3 spiral arms for 12,000 years," Trell said. "We achieved this through strict regulations on military development." Miller noticed how the alien's gaze kept returning to him. Not to the world leaders, but to him, a military man. "To join the Council, Earth must agree to our primary treaty. No species may build warships above Class 4 capabilities." The Secretary General leaned forward. "And what exactly is Class 4? Trell made a gesture, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed specifications for ships, weapon systems, and power outputs, all with hard limits. Miller studied the hologram, his eyes narrowing. The limits were just above Earth's current military technology, almost as if they were designed specifically to contain human advancement. "Why these specific restrictions?" Miller asked, speaking out of turn. All 4 of Trell's eyes focused on him. "For peace." "That's not an answer," Miller said, ignoring the Secretary General's warning glance. Trell's mouth formed what might have been a smile. "There are threats in this galaxy that require management. The Council has found that unrestricted military development leads to disaster." "What threats?" Miller pressed. "The most significant is what we call the tide," Trell said after a pause. "But that is Council business, not for potential members to concern themselves with." Over the next week, Earth's nations debated the alien offer. Miller spent his time studying every word, every gesture the aliens had made. Something felt wrong. "They're hiding something," he told General Porter as they walked through the temporary military camp set up near the alien ship. "These restrictions aren't about peace. They're about keeping us weak." Porter sighed. "Maybe. But what choice do we have? They've offered us technology, medicine, access to other worlds." "At the price of our ability to defend ourselves," Miller countered. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with one of the smaller aliens, a being named Vel, who served as Trell's assistant. "Pardon me," Vel said, its voice higher and more mechanical than Trell's. "I was admiring your military structure. Very efficient." Miller studied the alien. Unlike Trell, Vel seemed genuinely curious. "Thank you. I hope we'll have the chance to learn from your people as well." "Oh yes," Vel said, its eyes blinking rapidly. "The Council has much to teach species like yours." It paused. "Though not all Council knowledge is shared equally." "What do you mean by that?" Miller asked. Vel seemed to realize it had said too much. "Nothing of importance." "Good day, Commander." It hurried away. 3 days later, Earth's nations voted to accept the Council's terms. Miller stood at the back of the room as the treaty was signed, watching the satisfaction in Trell's 4 eyes. Later that night, Miller found himself assigned as Earth's military liaison to the alien delegation. His first duty, a tour of the alien ship. The vessel was enormous inside, with corridors that seemed to bend in ways that hurt his eyes. Trell led the tour, pointing out technology that made Miller's military mind race with possibilities and restrictions. This propulsion system, Trell explained, gesturing to a pulsing blue core, allows travel between stars in days rather than centuries. You will be granted limited versions of this technology. Limited? Miller asked. Class 4 approved, Trell said smoothly. Sufficient for commerce and cultural exchange, but not for serious military applications, Miller noted. Trell's eyes narrowed slightly. The Council finds that most species are happier focusing on arts and sciences rather than weapons. As they continued the tour, Miller noticed a sealed door. Unlike the others, this one had markings that glowed red. What's in there? He asked. Council security matters, Trell said quickly, not relevant to Earth's integration. Miller made a mental note of the door's location. Something about Trell's tone had changed. There was tension there. 6 months passed. Earth began receiving its first approved alien technologies. Medical advances cured 3 major diseases. New energy systems made fossil fuels obsolete almost overnight. But Miller remained uneasy. Now an admiral overseeing Earth's compliance with Council restrictions, he had access to all reports about alien activities, and something wasn't adding up. They're scanning our military installations constantly, he told his new assistant, Lieutenant Ryan. Not just checking for compliance. They're assessing our capabilities in detail. Ryan, young but sharp, nodded. I've noticed they're particularly interested in how quickly we adapt their technology. Miller tapped his desk, almost like they're afraid of what we might do with it. That night, Miller used his security clearance to access the sealed section of the alien database. What he found made his blood run cold. Internal Council communications referred to Earth as a potential problem species with concerning development vectors. One message from Trell to the Council leadership stood out. Humans display unusual creativity in weapons design. The standard restrictions may not be sufficient long-term. Recommend consideration of the Oversight Protocol. Miller didn't know what the Oversight Protocol was, but he didn't like the sound of it. Even more troubling were the fragmented references to the tide that Trell had mentioned. From what Miller could piece together, it wasn't just a threat. It was a world-ending force that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations, and for some reason, the Council seemed more interested in containing it than defeating it. As Miller shut down his terminal, he made a decision. Earth needed to know what they were really dealing with, and if the Council was holding humanity back from defending itself against a genuine threat, then perhaps it was time to start bending some alien rules. He would need allies, both human and possibly non-human. Vel, the curious alien assistant, might be a start. And he'd need scientists who could understand the Council's technology well enough to find its weaknesses. Because if Miller's suspicions were correct, Earth had just signed away its right to survive. 5 years passed since the aliens first came to Earth. Life had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The skies above major cities now showed strange ships coming and going. Alien technology had made many things better. Sickness was down, energy was clean, and food was plenty. But Admiral Jack Miller knew the cost of these gifts. Earth's military power remained frozen, stuck just above where it had been when the Council arrived. Any time human scientists tried to build something too powerful, Council observers would appear with friendly but firm reminders about the treaty. Miller sat in his office at the United Earth Defense Command, reading reports. His hair had more gray now, and lines marked his face. The door opened, and Lieutenant Ryan walked in, now a full commander himself. "Sir, Dr. Reeves is here to see you," Ryan said. Miller nodded. "Send her in." Dr. Emily Reeves was Earth's top scientist working with alien technology. Smart and direct, she had been helping Miller quietly investigate the Council's true plans. "I found something," she said without greeting, placing a small device on Miller's desk. "We need to use this now, before they detect it." Miller touched the device, and a hologram appeared between them. It showed stars, planets, and what looked like a dark cloud moving slowly across the map. "What am I looking at?" Miller asked. "I accessed the Council's deep archives," Reeves said, her voice low. "This is the tide they mentioned. It's real, Jack, and it's destroyed hundreds of worlds." Miller studied the map. "What exactly is it?" "Some kind of force that eats everything. Planets, stars, life. The Council has tracked it for thousands of years. And they're fighting it." Reeves laughed without humor. "That's the thing. They don't fight it. They run from it. They sacrifice outer worlds to slow it down while their core worlds stay safe." Miller felt cold. "And Earth? We're in its path, maybe 30 years away from contact." Miller stood and walked to the window, looking at the alien ships above the city. "Why didn't they tell us?" "Because of this," Reeves said, changing the hologram. Now it showed Council reports, translated to English. "They've been studying us. They think humans have unusual problem-solving skills and aggression levels. We adapt too quickly. We're too willing to fight. That's why the restrictions," Miller realized. "They're afraid of what we might do if we had their technology." "There's more," Reeves said. "I found patterns in the data about the tide. It has a structure, Jack. A weakness. I think it could be defeated with the right weapon. But building that weapon would break the treaty," Miller guessed. Reeves nodded. "By about 10 levels." The next day, Miller requested a meeting with the alien liaison Vel, who had become more friendly with humans over the years. They met in a park, away from Council monitoring. "Vel," Miller said as they walked, "I need to ask you something directly. What is the tide, and why won't the Council fight it?" The alien stopped walking, its 4 eyes blinking in surprise. "You're not supposed to know about that. But I do, and I know Earth is in its path." Vel looked around nervously. "The Council has lived with the tide for thousands of years. It's part of the natural order now." "Natural?" Miller's voice rose. "There's nothing natural about letting worlds die when you could save them." "It's not that simple," Vel said. "The Council tried fighting long ago. They lost badly. Now they manage the tide by directing its path away from important systems. And toward systems like ours," Miller said coldly. Vel's skin changed color slightly. "You weren't supposed to learn this so soon. Most species don't figure it out until the tide is almost upon them." "Most species aren't human," Miller replied. That night, Miller called an emergency meeting with Earth's top leaders. In a secure room deep underground, he and Reeves shared what they had learned. "Let me be clear," Miller said to the shocked faces around the table. "The Council isn't here to help us. They're containing us while setting us up as a buffer zone." The president of the United Earth Government, a woman named Helen Torres, spoke first. "Can we be sure of this?" Reeves played the holograms again. "The data is from their own systems. What do you suggest, Admiral?" Torres asked. Miller took a deep breath. "Dr. Reeves believes we can build a weapon, a ship that could actually hurt the tide. But it would be far beyond what the Council allows." "They would stop us if they knew," the defense minister said. "Then they can't know," Miller replied simply. The room fell silent as everyone considered what he was suggesting. "Where would we even build such a ship?" someone asked. "Mars," Reeves said. "We have mining operations there already. The Council doesn't watch them as closely as Earth facilities." Torres studied Miller's face. "You're asking us to risk everything. If the Council discovers we're breaking the treaty, they might cut us off completely, or worse." "And if we do nothing," Miller countered, "the tide will definitely destroy us in 30 years. The Council has already written Earth off. After hours of debate, the vote was unanimous. Project Defiance would begin in secret. 3 months later, Miller stood on the surface of Mars, watching as massive machines dug into the red soil. Officially, this was a new mining operation to extract rare materials. In reality, they were building an underground shipyard. Reeves stood beside him in her spacesuit. The Council's observer ships make their Mars flyby every 14 days. We'll need to be careful with energy signatures. Miller nodded. How long until we have a working prototype? 2 years for the basic ship, maybe 5 for the complete weapons system. I've got our best people working on it, using everything we've learned from the Council's tech. Will it work? Miller asked. Reeves looked up at the stars. In theory, the tide has a quantum structure that should be vulnerable to the right kind of gravitational disruption. No one's tried it before because the Council avoids any research in that direction. Why would they avoid researching a weapon against their greatest enemy? Miller wondered. I don't know, Reeves admitted, but I found references to something called the Makers in their oldest files. Whatever the tide is, I think the Council is afraid of more than just it. As they walked back to the Mars base, Miller felt the weight of their secret. Earth was gambling everything on a ship that might not work against an enemy they barely understood, while hiding from supposed allies who might become enemies. But they had no choice. When faced with extinction, humans didn't surrender. They fought back, even if they had to break every rule in the galaxy to do it. The red dust of Mars swirled around the massive hidden entrance as it slowly opened. Admiral Miller's transport settled onto the landing pad, its engines powering down. This was his 10th visit to the secret shipyard in the past year, but the sight still amazed him each time. As the airlock cycled, Dr. Reeves waited for him inside. 2 years had passed since they began Project Defiance. Welcome back, Admiral, she said as he removed his helmet. You're just in time for the power core test. They walked through wide tunnels carved deep into the Martian landscape. Hundreds of workers moved around them, carrying equipment or steadying screens. All of them had been carefully chosen for both their skills and their loyalty. How's progress? Miller asked. Good and bad, Reeves replied. The ship's hull is nearly complete. We've successfully built most systems using modified Council tech. Tom is keeping the Council observers distracted with his fake mining operations. Tom Wilson was their security expert, a man who could make anyone believe almost anything. His fake mining facility on the surface kept the occasional Council inspector satisfied. And the bad news? Miller asked. Reeves stopped at a massive window overlooking the main construction bay. Below them stood the skeleton of an enormous ship, easily 10 times larger than anything Earth had built before. The weapon system is proving difficult, she admitted. The gravitational disruptor requires power levels we're struggling to maintain. Miller studied the ship. Unlike the smooth, elegant Council vessels, the UES Defiance was angular and intimidating. It looked like what it was, a warship built by humans who refused to accept extinction. Will it be ready in time? Miller asked. It has to be. In a small office above the Martian surface, Tom Wilson entertained a Council inspector named Gare. The alien was tall with 6 limbs and seemed constantly uncomfortable in Mars gravity. As you can see, Tom said, pointing to mining charts that were entirely made up. Our extraction of rare minerals has increased by 40% since last quarter. Gare studied the charts with 3 of his eyes while the other 3 scanned the room. Impressive output. Yet your energy consumption is unusually high. Tom laughed casually. Mars is cold. Keeping our people warm takes power. Indeed. Gare placed a small device on the table. We've detected unusual readings from this region. Deep scans show large empty spaces beneath the surface. Tom didn't let his smile falter. Natural caves. Mars has many of them. We use some for storage. I would like to see these. Storage caves, Gare said. Of course, Tom replied, already planning which of the fake storage areas to show the inspector. Tomorrow morning. I need to prepare the transport. Gare agreed, but Tom could tell the alien wasn't fully convinced. As soon as Gare left, Tom sent an urgent message to Miller. They're getting suspicious. Need better cover story. Deep underground, the first test of the Defiance's power core was about to begin. Miller and Reeves stood in the control room, surrounded by engineers. If this works, Reeves explained, we'll have enough power for both the ship's systems and the gravitational disruptor. And if it doesn't? Miller asked. Then we're back to the drawing board, she said grimly. The countdown began. The core, built using a combination of Earth technology and stolen Council designs, hummed to life. Screens showed power levels rising steadily. Looking good, one engineer said. Approaching 50% capacity. Miller felt hope rising. Then alarms began to sound. Power fluctuation. Someone shouted. The containment field is destabilizing. Reeves moved quickly, typing commands into her console. Shut it down. Now. The core powered down just before disaster. When the dust settled, Reeves looked exhausted. What happened? Miller asked. The Council's tech isn't designed to produce this much power, she explained. They've built in limitations we didn't see. Miller slammed his fist on the railing. They thought of everything. Not everything, came a quiet voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Vel standing there. Guards immediately raised their weapons, but Miller waved them down. How did you get in here? Your Mr. Wilson isn't the only one who can create distractions, Vel said, walking forward slowly. I've suspected what you were doing for some time. Are you here to stop us? Miller asked, tensing. Vel's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. No, I'm here to help you. Later, in a secure room, Vel explained. The Council fears humans because you question everything. Most species accept the Council's rules without asking why. But not you, Reeves asked. I've served the Council for 200 years, Vel said. Long enough to see patterns, long enough to wonder why we never fight the tide. Miller leaned forward. And why don't you? Because the Council didn't create the technology that holds our civilization together, Vel said simply. They found it, thousands of years ago. They don't fully understand how it works, only how to use it. And they're afraid of breaking it, Reeves realized. Exactly. The gravitational technology you're trying to build, the Council has records of similar weapons used against the tide long ago. They worked, but had side effects. What side effects? Miller asked. The records aren't clear, but the Council leadership believes these weapons may have damaged space itself. Miller and Reeves exchanged glances. Is that why you're here? To warn us off. Vel made a gesture that might have been a shrug. I'm here because I believe extinction is worse than risk. The Council would rather sacrifice Earth than try something dangerous. And you don't agree, Miller said. I've grown to respect humans, Vel admitted. You're stubborn and sometimes frightening, but you're also brave in ways my people have forgotten. Vel pulled out a small crystal and placed it on the table. This contains technical data about the tide structure and proper designs for the power system you're trying to build. Reeves picked up the crystal, her eyes wide. This could save us months of work. There's something else you should know, Vel said, looking troubled. The tide is changing course. It's moving faster than predicted. Your Earth now has perhaps 5 years, not 30. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Can we build the ship in time? Miller asked Reeves. She studied the data from the crystal, her face lighting up with understanding. With this? Yes, but we'll need to work day and night. Then that's what we'll do, Miller said, standing up. He turned to Vel. What happens to you when the Council discovers you've helped us? That depends on whether you succeed, Vel said simply. If you fail, we all die anyway. 3 days later, the power core hummed to life again. This time, there were no alarms. The energy readings climbed steadily until they reached 100%. In the control room, Reeves smiled for the first time in weeks. "We have power." Across the shipyard, workers cheered. Miller looked at the massive ship taking shape below. They still had much to do, but now they had a real chance. "Begin Phase 2, he ordered. "Install the weapon systems." Above them, on the surface of Mars, Tom Wilson continued his dance of deception with the Council observers, buying time with fake reports and distractions. But everyone knew the truth. Sooner or later, the Council would discover what they were building. The race was on to complete the Defiance before that happened, before the tide arrived, before humanity's time ran out. Alarms blared throughout the underground Mars base. Admiral Miller ran down the corridor toward the command center, his heart pounding. After 3 years of secrecy, their time had run out. "Status report," he shouted as he entered the room. Commander Ryan looked up from his display, his face grim. "Council ships have entered Mars orbit, 7 vessels, including what looks like a heavy cruiser." On the main screen, Miller could see the alien ships taking position above the red planet. Their smooth oval shapes seemed to glow against the dark sky. "Have they sent any messages?" Miller asked. "Just one," Ryan replied. "Cease all unauthorized activities immediately." Miller turned to Dr. Reeves, who had been working nonstop for days. "How close is the Defiance to being ready?" "The main systems are online," she said, exhaustion clear in her voice. "The gravitational disruptor is installed but untested. We need another week minimum." "We don't have a week," Miller said. He activated the base-wide communication system. "All personnel, this is Admiral Miller. Begin launch preparations. We're leaving in 3 hours." Vel, who had become a permanent fixture on the project, approached Miller. "The Council won't just let you leave. They'll try to disable the ship before it can clear Mars orbit." "I know," Miller said. "That's why we need a distraction." On the surface, Tom Wilson faced the Council delegation that had landed near the fake mining facility. Ambassador Trell himself had come, flanked by 6 armed guards. His 4 eyes showed no emotion. "Mr. Wilson," Trell said coldly, "your deception ends today. We know what you've been building beneath the surface." Tom smiled his most charming smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about. We're just miners here. Our scans show a massive vessel under construction, a warship that violates at least 15 Council regulations." Trell stepped closer. "Where is Admiral Miller?" "I believe he's on Earth." Tom lied smoothly. "Would you like me to call him?" Trell made a gesture, and his guards raised their weapons. "Take us to the entrance of the underground facility. Now." Tom looked at his watch. He needed to stall for another 2 hours. "I'd be happy to give you a tour, but I'll need to check with Earth Command first. Council protocols, you understand." One of Trell's eyes twitched slightly. "You test my patience, human." "Just following the rules," Tom replied, still smiling. "You taught us how important rules are." Deep in the shipyard, the UES Defiance hummed with power as final preparations were made. The ship was massive, nearly a kilometer long, with a dark hull that seemed to swallow light. Unlike the elegant Council ships, the Defiance looked like what it was: a weapon. Inside the bridge, Miller watched as his crew took their stations. Many were young, Earth's best and brightest, trained in secret for this mission. "Main engines are green," reported the pilot, a young woman named Lisa Cooper. "All systems show ready." Miller turned to Reeves. "What about the gravitational disruptor?" "Power flow is stable," she said, "but we haven't calibrated the targeting system. We can't be sure it will work against the tide." "We'll have to figure that out on the way," Miller said. He activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, secure for launch. We have company waiting for us upstairs." As the crew strapped in, Vel approached Miller. "The Council ships will try to disable your engines first. Their weapons are designed to minimize casualties." "Good to know," Miller said. "Any other advice?" "Yes," Vel said seriously. "Don't destroy any Council ships if you can avoid it. Many aboard them don't know the truth about the tide." Miller nodded. We're not here to fight the Council. We're here to save everyone from the tide, whether they want our help or not." On the surface, Tom had finally run out of ways to delay. Trell and his guards now stood at the sealed entrance to the underground base. "Open it," Trell demanded. Tom looked at his watch again. They needed just 15 more minutes. "You know, Ambassador, I've always wondered something. Why does the Council really care what we humans do? You have thousands of worlds. We're just one small planet. Because your kind doesn't know when to stop," Trell said. "You push boundaries that should remain untouched." "Like fighting the tide?" Tom asked. Trell's 4 eyes widened slightly. "You know nothing about the tide. We know the Council uses planets like Earth as shields," Tom said, his friendly mask dropping. "We know you found your technology, not built it. And we know you're afraid of what might happen if someone actually tried to stop the tide instead of running from it." For a moment, Trell seemed speechless. Then he raised his hand, and his guards aimed their weapons. "Open the door, Mr. Wilson. This is your final warning." Tom sighed and pressed his hand to the scanner. "Your funeral." The massive doors began to open, revealing the tunnel leading down to the shipyard. But as they did, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Trell looked down in alarm. "What is happening?" Tom stepped back, smiling again. "That would be our ship launching. I'd move if I were you." The ceiling of the underground shipyard split open as massive doors retracted. Clouds of red dust billowed outward as the Defiance's engines ignited, lifting the enormous ship upward with incredible force. On the bridge, Miller gripped his chair as the ship shuddered around him. "Status." "Clearing the launch bay," Cooper reported. "Approaching surface level in 10 seconds. The view screen showed the red Martian landscape rushing toward them, then suddenly giving way to open sky as they burst through the surface. "Council ships detected," the tactical officer announced. "They're moving to intercept." Miller studied the display. 7 Council vessels had formed a blockade in orbit. "Full power to forward shields. Set course directly through their formation. Let's see if they're willing to fire on us." The Defiance accelerated upward, its massive form cutting through the thin Martian atmosphere. Ahead, the Council ships began to move, adjusting their position to cut off escape routes. "They're charging weapons," reported the tactical officer. "Hold course," Miller ordered. He opened a communication channel. "This is Admiral Miller of the UES Defiance to Council vessels. We have no hostile intentions toward you. Our mission is to stop the tide. Do not interfere." The response came immediately. Ambassador Trell's voice filled with anger. "Admiral Miller, you have violated Council law. Power down your ship immediately, or we will be forced to disable it." Miller looked at Vel, who nodded slightly. "They'll try to target our engines, but their weapons aren't designed to destroy a ship this size." "Good to know," Miller said, then addressed the crew. "Brace for impact. They're about to." Before he could finish, the ship shuddered as energy beams struck the shields. "Shields holding at 80%, someone reported. Miller nodded. "Continue acceleration. Full power to engines." The Defiance surged forward, directly toward the Council formation. It was a game of chicken, and Miller was betting that the Council ships would move rather than risk a collision with the much larger human vessel. He was right. As the Defiance approached, the Council ships broke formation, scattering to avoid the human warship. "We're clear," Cooper announced as they burst past the blockade. "Prepare for faster-than-light jump," Miller ordered. "Let's get out of here before they regroup." As the stars began to stretch on the view screen, a new alarm sounded. "New contact," the tactical officer shouted, his voice rising. "Massive energy signature detected at the edge of the solar system." Miller turned to Vel, whose 4 eyes had gone wide with fear. "It's the tide," Vel whispered. "It's here, years ahead of even my prediction." On the main screen, they could see it now. A darkness spreading across the stars, consuming everything in its path. The tide had arrived, and Earth's time had run out. On the bridge of the Defiance, silence fell as everyone stared at the view screen. The tide looked like a living darkness, spreading across the stars like black ink in water. Where it touched, stars dimmed and died. "It's heading straight for Earth," Commander Ryan said, breaking the silence. "Estimated time to arrival: 6 hours." Miller turned to Dr. Reeves. "Can the gravitational disruptor work in its current state?" She ran her fingers through her messy hair. "In theory, yes, but we haven't tested it, and we don't know the right frequency to target the tide structure. We'll need to get closer to scan it properly," she added, "dangerously close." Miller nodded and looked at the tactical display. The Council ships were regrouping, but they weren't pursuing the Defiance. Instead, they were turning away from both the human ship and the tide. "They're running," Miller said, disgust in his voice. "Just like Vel said they would." "They follow the old protocols," Vel explained, looking ashamed. "Sacrifice the outer system. Retreat to safe distance. Observe." Miller stood up, addressing the entire bridge crew. "Well, that's not humanity's way. We don't run from fights, especially when everything we love is at stake." He turned to the helm. "Cooper, set course directly for the tide. Maximum speed." Cooper hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Course set, Admiral." As the Defiance accelerated toward the greatest threat humanity had ever faced, Miller opened a channel to Earth. "This is Admiral Miller on the UES Defiance. We have visual confirmation of the tide entering the solar system. We are moving to engage." President Torres' voice came through the speakers. "Admiral, our sensors are just now detecting it. The Council embassy is evacuating. What are your chances?" Miller looked at Reeves, who could only shrug. "Unknown, Madam President, but we're the only hope Earth has." "Then good luck, Defiance. The hopes of humanity go with you." As the Defiance approached the tide, the crew got their first clear look at what they were facing. It wasn't just darkness. It was a swirling mass of energy that seemed to bend space itself. "Beginning scans," Reeves announced, her eyes fixed on her instruments. "The structure is like nothing I've ever seen. It's almost like what?" Miller prompted. "Like a program," she said, looking up in surprise. "It has patterns, repeating sequences. This isn't a natural phenomenon." Vel moved to her station, examining the data. The oldest Council records hint that the tide might be artificial, but no one believed them. "You mean someone made this thing?" Cooper asked from the helm. "It appears so," Reeves said. "And if it's made, it can be unmade." Her fingers flew over her console. "I'm identifying the frequency patterns now. The gravitational disruptor needs to match them precisely." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across every console. "We're being pulled in," Cooper shouted, fighting with the controls. "The tide has us in some kind of gravity well." Miller grabbed his chair to steady himself. "All power to engines. Get us free." "I can't," Cooper replied, panic in her voice. "It's too strong." Reeves looked up from her station. "Wait, this could work to our advantage. We need to get close anyway to use the disruptor effectively." "How close?" Miller asked. "Very close," she admitted, "almost inside it." Miller made his decision. "Cut engines. Let it pull us in. Divert all power to the gravitational disruptor." The bridge crew stared at him in shock, but followed his orders. The ship stopped fighting against the tide's pull and began to accelerate toward the darkness. "Disruptor power at maximum," reported the engineering officer, "but we've never tested it at these levels." "No time like the present," Miller said with grim humor. He turned to Reeves. "How much longer do you need?" 2 minutes to match the frequency pattern," she said, working frantically. "Maybe less." Miller looked at the view screen. The darkness was filling it now, tendrils of energy reaching toward the ship like hungry fingers. "Make it less." Just before the Defiance was swallowed by the tide, A communication came through. It was Ambassador Trell. Admiral Miller, cease this foolish action immediately. You don't understand what you're interfacing with. Miller smiled tightly. Actually, I think we do. It's a weapon, isn't it? A very old, very advanced weapon that the Council has been running from for thousands of years. Trell's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. It is beyond your comprehension. The makers created it for purposes we cannot fathom. Interfering with it could destroy reality itself. Or it could save billions of lives, Miller replied. I'll take that chance. He cut the transmission. On the bridge of the Defiance, silence fell as everyone stared at the view screen. The tide looked like a living darkness, spreading across the stars like black ink in water. Where it touched, stars dimmed and died. It's heading straight for Earth, Commander Ryan said, breaking the silence. Estimated time to arrival: 6 hours. Miller turned to Dr. Reeves. Can the gravitational disruptor work in its current state? She ran her fingers through her messy hair. In theory, yes, but we haven't tested it, and we don't know the right frequency to target the tide structure. We'll need to get closer to scan it properly, she added, dangerously close. Miller nodded and looked at the tactical display. The Council ships were regrouping, but they weren't pursuing the Defiance. Instead, they were turning away from both the human ship and the tide. They're running, Miller said, disgust in his voice. Just like Vel said they would. They follow the old protocols, Vel explained, looking ashamed. Sacrifice the outer system. Retreat to safe distance. Observe. Miller stood up, addressing the entire bridge crew. Well, that's not humanity's way. We don't run from fights, especially when everything we love is at stake. He turned to the helm. Cooper, set course directly for the tide. Maximum speed. Cooper hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Course set, Admiral. As the Defiance accelerated toward the greatest threat humanity had ever faced, Miller opened a channel to Earth. This is Admiral Miller on the UES Defiance. We have visual confirmation of the tide entering the solar system. We are moving to engage. President Tor's voice came through the speakers. Admiral, our sensors are just now detecting it. The Council embassy is evacuating. What are your chances? Miller looked at Reeves, who could only shrug. Unknown, Madam President, but we're the only hope Earth has. Then good luck, Defiance. The hopes of humanity go with you. As the Defiance approached the tide, the crew got their first clear look at what they were facing. It wasn't just darkness. It was a swirling mass of energy that seemed to bend space itself. Beginning scans, Reeves announced, her eyes fixed on her instruments. The structure is like nothing I've ever seen. It's almost like what? Miller prompted. Like a program, she said, looking up in surprise. It has patterns, repeating sequences. This isn't a natural phenomenon. Vel moved to her station, examining the data. The oldest Council records hint that the tide might be artificial, but no one believed them. You mean someone made this thing? Cooper asked from the helm. It appears so, Reeves said. And if it's made, it can be unmade. Her fingers flew over her console. I'm identifying the frequency patterns now. The gravitational disruptor needs to match them precisely. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across every console. We're being pulled in, Cooper shouted, fighting with the controls. The tide has us in some kind of gravity well. Miller grabbed his chair to steady himself. All power to engines. Get us free. I can't. Cooper replied, panic in her voice. It's too strong. Reeves looked up from her station. Wait, this could work to our advantage. We need to get close anyway to use the disruptor effectively. How close? Miller asked. Very close, she admitted. Almost inside it. Miller made his decision. Cut engines. Let it pull us in. Divert all power to the gravitational disruptor. The bridge crew stared at him in shock, but followed his orders. The ship stopped fighting against the tide's pull and began to accelerate toward the darkness. "Disruptor power at maximum," reported the engineering officer. "But we've never tested it at these levels." "No time like the present," Miller said with grim humor. He turned to Reeves. "How much longer do you need?" 2 minutes to match the frequency pattern," she said, working frantically. "Maybe less." Miller looked at the view screen. The darkness was filling it now, tendrils of energy reaching toward the ship like hungry fingers. "Make it less." Just before the Defiance was swallowed by the tide, a communication came through. It was Ambassador Trell. "Admiral Miller, cease this foolish action immediately. You don't understand what you're interfacing with." Miller smiled tightly. "Actually, I think we do. It's a weapon, isn't it? A very old, very advanced weapon that the Council has been running from for thousands of years." Trell's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "It is beyond your comprehension. The makers created it for purposes we cannot fathom. Interfering with it could destroy reality itself. Or it could save billions of lives," Miller replied. "I'll take that chance." He cut the transmission. Reeves looked up. "I've got it. Frequency pattern identified and matched. Disruptor ready to fire." The ship shuddered again as the edge of the tide touched its shields. Alarms blared as systems began to fail. "Shields failing," Ryan reported. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7. "Fire the disruptor," Miller ordered. Reeves activated the weapon. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a pulse of energy unlike anything they had ever seen erupted from the Defiance, spreading outward in waves of blue-white light. Where the energy touched the tide, the darkness seemed to unravel. Like a sweater with a loose thread being pulled, the tide began to come apart. "It's working," Reeves shouted over the noise of straining systems. "The quantum structure is destabilizing." On the view screen, they watched as the tide began to dissolve around them, revealing stars beyond. But the Defiance was still caught in the turbulence, shaking violently as the massive forces battled around it. "Hull integrity at 20%, Ryan called out. "We can't take much more." Miller gripped his chair. "Hold on. Just hold on." With a final surge, the gravitational disruptor sent out one last pulse. The tide seemed to collapse in on itself, the darkness shrinking to a single point of intense light. And then, nothing. Silence fell on the bridge. Outside, the stars shone clearly again. "Is it gone?" Cooper asked, her voice barely a whisper. Reeves checked her instruments, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "Yes, it's gone. Completely." A cheer erupted from the exhausted crew. Miller allowed himself a small smile before asking, "Ship status?" "Damaged but repairable," Ryan reported. "No casualties." Miller looked at Vel, who stood staring at the view screen in disbelief. "You did it," the alien said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Miller corrected. "Humanity may have built this ship, but we had help." 1 month later, Miller stood in the United Earth Government chamber as representatives from dozens of worlds, former council members, gathered to form a new alliance. President Torres addressed the assembly. For thousands of years, the council ran from a threat they didn't understand. They sacrificed countless worlds to save their own. Humanity chose a different path. She gestured to Miller and his crew. These brave men and women risked everything to save not just Earth, but every world in the tide's path. And in doing so, they discovered a truth. The tide was not some unstoppable force of nature, but a weapon, one that could be defeated. Miller looked at Vel, now serving as representative of his own people, who nodded in acknowledgement. "Today," Torres continued, "we form a new alliance. Not one based on fear and sacrifice, but on courage and cooperation. The Defiance protected fleet will be our shared shield, with ships built by all our worlds working together." As the chamber erupted in cheers, Miller thought about the journey that had brought them here. The Council had made rules to hold humanity back. fearing what they might do with advanced technology. They were right to be afraid. Humans refused to accept defeat. They broke the rules, built a warship, and faced an enemy that others had run from for millennia. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever.
The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the massive circular table, their various forms creating strange shadows under the blue-white lights. At the center of their debate was humanity, the newest and most controversial addition to their ancient alliance. Ambassador Vex of the Altari leaned forward, his silver skin gleaming as he spoke. The humans have been part of our council for only 6 months, and already they demand equal voting rights. They want trade agreements. They want military partnerships. He paused, letting his words sink in. They forget their place. Counselor. Thal, representing the insectoid Kresh, clicked his mandibles in agreement. Their world is nothing special. Earth scores only Class 7 on the habitability scale. Most of our home worlds are Class 3 or 4. These humans come from a soft, easy planet, yet they act like they belong among the great civilizations. The debate had been going on for hours. Some council members wanted to simply ignore humanity's requests. Others suggested giving them minor roles in galactic affairs. But Vex had a different idea, one that would solve their human problem permanently. Propose we give them exactly what they want, Vex said, his voice smooth and cold. They want to prove they belong among us? Let them prove it on Korath Prime. The hall fell silent. Even the translator devices seemed to pause before converting his words into the various alien languages. Korath Prime. Every species in the galaxy knew that name. It was a Class 15 death world, the highest rating on the danger scale. 3 different alien expeditions had tried to establish colonies there over the past century. None had lasted more than a week. The Vrex had lost 200 colonists in 4 days. The proud Zephyrians had fled after just 2 days, leaving behind only automated distress beacons. Even the hardy silicon-based Rocklings had abandoned their attempt, after losing half their expedition to the planet's impossible conditions. You cannot be serious, whispered Elder Nira of the Peaceful Symphons. That world has killed thousands. The storms alone can strip flesh from bone. The gravity would crush most of our people. The very air is toxic. Vex smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his dark eyes. Exactly. The humans think they're tough because they survived some small wars on their little world. They think they deserve respect because they managed to reach space. Let them try their luck on a real challenge. Counselor Bricks of the Aquatic Tidewalkers bubbled nervously. What if they actually succeed? What if they establish a colony? Impossible, Vex replied firmly. We've run the calculations. Even our best estimates give them less than a 2% chance of survival past the first week. The humans will either die quickly, or they'll flee home with their pride broken. Either way, they'll learn their proper place in the galaxy. The vote was closer than Vex had expected, but it passed. 7 species voted in favor, 4 against, with 1 abstention. The humans would be offered the opportunity to establish a colony on Korath Prime, presented as a chance to prove their worth to the galactic community. 3 weeks later, Captain Reed stood on the bridge of the colony ship Determination, reading the official mission briefing one more time. Around him, his crew worked quietly, preparing for what the Galactic Council had called humanity's greatest opportunity. Reed was a practical man in his 40s, with graying hair and steady hands. He'd served in Earth's Merchant Marine for 20 years before joining the Colonial Service. He'd seen dangerous planets before, but nothing like what the briefing described. Captain, called Navigator Hayes from her station. We're receiving the final data package from the Council. Environmental readings, atmospheric composition, surface maps, what they have of them anyway. Reed nodded. Display the basics on the main screen. The bridge's large display lit up with information that made several crew members take sharp breaths. Korath Prime was larger than Earth with nearly twice the gravity. The atmosphere was breathable but thick with industrial pollutants that would corrode most metals within days. Surface temperatures ranged from freezing to boiling depending on the weather. which changed without warning. The planet experienced acid rain, lightning storms that could last for weeks, and seismic activity that regularly reshaped the landscape. And the wildlife? Asked Dr. Stone, the expedition's chief scientist. She was a small woman with curious eyes who seemed more excited than worried about their destination. Hayes pulled up another data file. Hostile doesn't begin to cover it. Carnivorous plants that actively hunt prey, pack hunters the size of elephants, flying creatures with acidics, breath, and that's just what previous expeditions managed to catalog before. She didn't finish the sentence. Before they all died, completed Chief Engineer Mills dryly. Mills was a big man with calloused hands who'd spent years building settlements on frontier worlds. Well, at least we know what we're walking into. Reed studied the data for a long moment. Something bothered him about this whole mission, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The Galactic Council had been surprisingly generous with this opportunity, especially given how they'd treated humanity's other requests. They'd even provided a ship and basic supplies, though Reed noticed the equipment was all older models. Reliable, but not the latest technology. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Lang, "I'm picking up the Council observation ship on long-range sensors. They're maintaining distance but following our course." "Observation ship?" Reed frowned. That wasn't mentioned in the briefing. Dr. Stone looked up from her scientific instruments. "Maybe they want to document humanity's first attempt at colonizing a Class 15 world, for historical records." Mills snorted. "Or maybe they want to watch us fail. Did anyone else notice they gave us exactly enough supplies for 6 months? Not a year, not 2 years, 6 months, like they're expecting us to give up by then." Reed had noticed the same thing. The more he thought about it, the more this felt less like an opportunity and more like a test, or worse, a trap. But 500 human colonists were counting on him to get them safely to their new home, whatever the Council's real motives might be. "How long until we reach Korath Prime?" he asked. 18 hours, sir," Hayes replied. Reed looked around at his crew. Good. People who'd volunteered for this mission despite its obvious dangers. Behind them, through the ship's corridors, were 500 more humans who'd left Earth behind for a chance at a new life. Families with children, young couples looking for adventure, older folks seeking one last frontier, scientists eager to study an unexplored world, engineers ready to build something from nothing. They'd all read the briefings. They all knew the risks. And they'd all come anyway, because that's what humans did. When faced with the impossible, they didn't back down. They figured out how to make it work. "All right, people," Reed said, his voice calm and steady. "We've got 18 hours to finalize our landing preparations. Dr. Stone, I want detailed analysis of those environmental readings. Mills, double-check all our equipment and make sure we have backup plans for when things break down. Hayes, plot us the safest possible landing approach." As his crew got to work, Reed took one last look at the data about Korath Prime. Somewhere out there, an alien observation ship was following them, probably filled with council members expecting to watch humanity's newest colony collapse within days. Reed smiled grimly. Maybe they would fail. Maybe Korath Prime would prove too much even for human stubbornness. But if the council thought humans would give up without a fight, they were about to learn something new about the species they'd so casually dismissed. The determination flew on through space, carrying 500 humans toward what the galaxy considered certain death. In the observation ship following behind, Ambassador Vex watched their approach with satisfaction, already composing the report he'd send back to the Council about humanity's inevitable failure. Neither he nor Captain Reed could have predicted what would actually happen when humans met their first real death world. The first thing that hit the humans was the smell. Even before the landing shuttles touched down on Korath Prime's surface, the filtered air systems couldn't completely block the harsh chemical stench that seeped through every seal. It was like breathing inside a battery factory mixed with rotting eggs and burning metal. Captain Reed gripped his safety harness as Shuttle Alpha bounced through the violent atmospheric entry. Around him, 25 colonists held on tight while the small craft shook like a toy in a hurricane. Through the tiny windows, Flashes of green lightning lit up angry purple clouds that stretched to every horizon. "Landing zone coming up," called Pilot Martinez over the intercom, her voice strained with concentration. "It's going to be rough, people. This storm isn't giving us any breaks." Reed looked at the readouts on his wrist display. Outside temperature, 47 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, 2.3 times Earth normal. Wind speed, 85 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 120. And they were landing during what the previous survey teams had called mild weather. The shuttle slammed into the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. Through the cabin, Reed heard the hiss of the air recycling system working overtime to filter the toxic atmosphere outside. Emergency lights flickered as the shuttle's electronics struggled with the electromagnetic interference from the constant lightning. "Hull integrity holding," Martinez reported. "But I'm seeing corrosion warnings already. Whatever's in this air, it doesn't like our metal." Reed unstrapped himself and moved to the small window. What he saw outside made his stomach tighten. The landscape looked like a battlefield designed by nightmares. Black soil stretched in all directions, broken by twisted rock formations that glowed faintly with some kind of mineral phosphorescence. Strange trees, if they could be called trees, reached toward the storm clouds with branches that moved too much in the wind, like they were grasping for something. "Captain," came Dr. Stone's voice over the radio from Shuttle Beta. "You need to see this. Our landing scanners are picking up movement, big movement, and it's heading our way." Reed activated his personal scanner and swept it across the area. Outside their shuttle, the readings made him frown. Multiple heat signatures, each one larger than a grown human, were converging on their landing zone from 3 different directions. "All shuttles, this is Reed," he said into his communicator. "We have incoming contact. Everyone stays inside until we know what we're dealing with." But even as he spoke, something slammed into the side of Shuttle Alpha with enough force to tip it slightly. Through the reinforced window, Reed caught sight of what looked like a plant, but a plant with teeth and claws that scraped against the shuttle's hull, leaving deep scratches in the military-grade armor. "Jesus," whispered Martinez. "That thing's trying to eat our shuttle." Aboard the observation ship hovering safely in orbit, Ambassador Vex watched the human landing with satisfaction. Multiple screens showed feeds from automated surveillance drones that the Council had deployed around Korath Prime years ago. "The first shuttle has been grounded for 12 minutes, reported his aide, a young Altari named Kess. "Local predators have already located their position. Estimated time until first casualties, 6 to 8 minutes. Vex nodded approvingly. "Are the other shuttles experiencing similar difficulties?" "Yes, sir. Shuttle Beta is under attack by a pack of what they are. Database identifies as stalker vines, carnivorous plants that typically work together to bring down large prey. Shuttle Gamma has landed in what appears to be a nest of acid spitters." "Excellent," Vex said, settling back in his comfortable chair. "Begin recording everything. The other Council members will want to see exactly how quickly these humans collapse when faced with real danger." On the screens, they could see several humans in environmental suits trying to exit their shuttles, only to be driven back by attacks from creatures that defied easy description. One appeared to be a cross between a crocodile and a giant centipede, with dozens of legs and a mouth full of rotating teeth. Another looked like a walking tree, except its branches ended in snapping mouths instead of leaves. "The humans are trapped in their landing craft," Kess observed. "Standard protocol for most species at this point would be to call for immediate evacuation." Vex smiled his cold smile. "Contact the human ship in orbit. Let's see how long it takes Captain Reed to admit defeat and beg for rescue." But Captain Reed wasn't thinking about rescue. He was thinking about lunch. "Dr. Stone," he said into his communicator, "what do we know about the digestive systems of these creatures attacking us?" "Excuse me?" came her puzzled reply from Shuttle Beta. "I'm looking at this plant thing trying to chew through our hull," Reed explained calmly, "and I'm wondering what it eats normally. Because if it's trying this hard to get to us, maybe we taste like something it already hunts." Dr. Stone was quiet for a moment. "That's actually brilliant, Captain. Give me a few minutes to run some scans." While she worked, Reed turned to the colonists in his shuttle. They were scared, he could see it in their faces, but they weren't panicking. Marines Beck and Torres had their weapons ready. Engineer, Mills was studying the hull damage with professional interest. Even the families with children were staying calm, trusting their leaders to find a solution. "Okay, people," Reed said. "Here's what we're going to do. These creatures are treating us like prey, which means they're probably not as smart as they are dangerous. Mills, what would happen if we vented some of our waste heat through the hull?" Mills understood immediately. "Make ourselves look less appetizing? Yeah, that could work. Give me 5 minutes. Me 5. Dr. Stone," Reed continued, "can you identify what these things are actually hunting? What's their normal food source?" "Already on it," came her reply. "Fascinating, Captain. These stalker vines appear to be ambush predators that normally hunt something called tunnel borers, large underground creatures that generate significant heat signatures. If we could somehow mimic the defensive mechanisms of these tunnel borers—" "You mean fight back," said Marine Beck, checking his weapon. "I like that better than hiding." Reed made his decision. "All shuttles, this is Reed. We're not waiting for rescue. We're going on the offensive, but we do this smart. Dr. Stone, I want you to identify weak points on these creatures. Mills, prepare defensive modifications to our shuttles. Beck, Torres, and all security personnel. You're with me. For first contact." Ambassador Vex nearly dropped his drink when the first human emerged from Shuttle Alpha. Captain Reed stepped out into the toxic atmosphere of Korath Prime, wearing a basic environmental suit and carrying what appeared to be a modified mining laser. Behind him came 2 more humans armed and moving with the kind of tactical precision that made Vex uncomfortable. "What are they doing?" Kess asked, staring at the screens. No species has ever voluntarily exited their craft during a predator assault on Korath Prime. The stalker vine that had been trying to eat Shuttle Alpha turned toward the humans with obvious interest. It was a massive thing, easily 3 meters tall, with a trunk like a twisted tree and branches that ended in tooth-filled mouths. It should have been able to kill 3 humans without effort. Instead, Reed calmly raised his mining laser and fired a sustained beam directly at what Dr. Stone had identified as the creature's primary nervous cluster. The stalker vine made a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe and collapsed. "Effective," Reed said into his communicator, his voice perfectly steady. "Dr. Stone, the neural cluster location was accurate. How many more of these things are we dealing with?" "Shuttle Beta is engaging 4 stalker vines," came her reply, and Vex could hear weapon fire in the background. "Shuttle Gamma has 2 acid spitters, but Mills has found their digestive weak point. And Captain, something interesting is happening. The local electromagnetic readings are actually decreasing now that we're fighting back." Reed nodded, then noticed something that made him smile grimly. Other creatures in the area, things that had been approaching to investigate the noise, had stopped moving toward the humans and were now backing away. "They're pack hunters," he realized aloud. "But they're not used to prey that fights back effectively. Torres, help me drag this carcass closer to the shuttles. I want the other predators to see exactly what happens when they mess with humans." In the observation ship, Ambassador Vex stared at the screens in growing disbelief. Not only were the humans not dying, they were actively hunting the creatures that had destroyed 3 previous alien expeditions, and they were doing it calmly, methodically, like it was just another day at work. "Sir," Kess said quietly, "perhaps we should inform the Council that the situation is developing differently than predicted." Vex said nothing. On the screens, he watched human engineers using parts from dead predators to reinforce their shuttle hulls against the acid rain. He watched human scientists collecting samples of everything they killed, already adapting to use local resources. He watched human families setting up temporary shelters in the wreckage of creatures that had terrorized this world for millennia. By the end of the first day, all 500 humans had successfully landed on Korath Prime. 0 casualties, 0 requests for evacuation. Instead, Captain Reed's final report of the day contained a single terrifying sentence. "Landing phase complete. Beg." 3 weeks after landing, Engineer Mills stood in what used to be a nest of acid spitters and marveled at what they'd built. The former Predator Den had been transformed into humanity's first permanent structure on Korath Prime, a workshop that hummed with activity as colonists turned the planet's dangers into useful tools. "Hand me that acid sack," Mills called to his assistant, a young woman named Parker who'd volunteered for the engineering corps. "Carefully now. These things still pack a punch even after the creature's dead." Parker lifted the biocontainer with practiced ease. 3 weeks of working with alien biochemistry had taught all the humans to handle materials that would have terrified them back on Earth. The acid sac contained a chemical compound that, when properly processed, could dissolve almost any mineral they'd encountered on Korath Prime. "Perfect for mining operations," Mills muttered, carefully connecting the sac to their improvised refinery. "What took the Vrex months to dig, we can clear in hours." Outside the workshop, the sound of construction echoed across their growing settlement. Where the first day had been about survival, the following weeks had been about adaptation. The humans had discovered something that the previous alien expeditions had missed. Korath Prime wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to communicate. "Doctor?" Stone emerged from the workshop's makeshift laboratory, holding a tablet displaying her latest findings. Her environmental suit was stained with various alien chemicals, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "Mills, you need to see this," she said, pulling up a complex diagram. "Remember how we thought the lightning storms were random? They're not. They follow patterns based on underground mineral deposits. The planet is essentially telling us where to find the richest mining sites." Mills looked at the data and whistled low. "So every time we see those green lightning clusters—" "Exactly. Concentrated rare earth deposits. The Zephyrians probably ran from storms that were actually pointing them toward the most valuable resources in the sector." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Reed, who walked in carrying what looked like a flowering branch. But as he got closer, both Mills and Dr. Stone could see that the flowers were actually small, tooth-lined mouths that snapped playfully at Reed's fingers. "Captain," Dr. Stone said carefully, "please tell me you didn't just domesticate a carnivorous plant." Reed grinned. "Meet our new security system. Turns out these snap blossoms only attack creatures that produce certain stress hormones. They're basically living alarm systems. Plant them around the perimeter, and they'll only bite intruders." Mills shook his head in amazement. 3 weeks ago, plants like that were trying to eat us." 3 weeks ago, we were stressed and afraid," Reed replied. "Now we're confident and settled. The local ecosystem is responding to our emotional state. It's like the planet can sense that we're not just visitors anymore, we're residents." This was the pattern that had emerged across their settlement. What the Galactic Council had classified as impossibly hostile was actually a complex ecosystem that responded to the behavior and attitude of new arrivals. Previous alien expeditions had approached Korath Prime with fear and desperation, triggering aggressive responses from the native life forms. But humans had approached it with curiosity and determination, and the planet had responded differently. Marine Beck jogged back into the settlement, returning from his morning patrol with a string of what looked like rainbow-colored fish slung over his shoulder. Except these fish had wings and could breathe fire when threatened. "Breakfast is served," he announced to the group of colonists gathered around the central cooking area. "Flame fishers, caught fresh from the thermal vents. Dr. Stone, you were right about the spice glands. They taste like nothing we've ever had on Earth." Beck had adapted to Korath Prime better than anyone expected. The former military man had discovered that the planet's dangerous wildlife responded well to confident, respectful hunting practices. Instead of trying to eliminate threats, he'd learned to work with the ecosystem's natural patterns. "Any trouble out there?" asked Torres, who was working on expanding their communications array. "Spotted a pack of tunnel crawlers about 2 kilometers east," Beck reported. "But they kept their distance. I think word is spreading among the local wildlife that humans aren't easy prey." This wasn't just Beck's imagination. Dr. Stone had documented behavioral changes in dozens of species around their settlement. Predators that had been aggressively territorial were now maintaining respectful distances. Scavengers were actually helping clean up areas around human structures. Even the notorious stalker vines had begun growing in patterns that seemed designed to provide natural windbreaks for the human buildings. It's like the planet is adapting to us at the same time we're adapting to it, Dr. Stone had written in her daily reports. Rather than seeing us as an invasive species, Korath Prime appears to be treating us as a new type of native life form. In the observation ship, Ambassador Vex paced back and forth in front of the monitoring screens, his silver skin flushed with frustration. The daily reports from the surveillance drones painted a picture that contradicted everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about Class 15 death worlds. "Show me the population count again," he demanded. Kess pulled up the latest data. 547 humans currently on the surface, sir. That's up from the original 500. Up? Vex stopped pacing. How is it up? Births, sir. 3 babies have been born since the colony was established and... Kess hesitated. And what? Requests for transfer, sir. Humans from other colonies are asking to be relocated to Korath Prime. They're calling it a paradise world in their communications. Vex stared at the screens showing the human settlement. What had started as a few defensive shelters was now a thriving town with permanent buildings, cultivated gardens, and even recreational areas. Children played in parks built around tamed carnivorous plants. Adults worked in harmony with creatures that had killed entire alien expeditions. Paradise world, he repeated numbly. They're calling a Class 15 death world a paradise. Sir, Kess said quietly, perhaps we should consider the possibility that our classification system doesn't account for certain variables. Before Vex could respond, their communications officer rushed in. Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from the human colony. It's addressed to the Galactic Council. Vex felt a chill run down his spine. Put it through. Captain Reed's face appeared on the main screen. He was standing in what appeared to be a comfortable office with windows that looked out over the human settlement. Behind him, alien plants grew in decorative pots, and the sound of human laughter could be heard from somewhere nearby. Greetings, Ambassador Vex, Reed said with a polite smile. I wanted to provide you with our 3-week status report. Vex found his voice. Captain Reed, I trust you're managing the challenges of your new environment? Reed's smile widened. Challenges? Ambassador, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Korath Prime isn't challenging us, it's welcoming us. We've established a permanent settlement successfully integrated with the local ecosystem and begun preliminary resource extraction. Operations? Resource extraction? Vex felt his stomach drop. The rare earth deposits here are incredibly rich, Reed continued cheerfully. We estimate that within 6 months, we'll be able to supply refined materials to the entire sector at competitive prices. We're also developing new technologies based on the planet's unique biochemistry. The potential for scientific advancement is extraordinary. Vex looked at the screens showing the human settlement. What he'd intended as a death sentence had become an economic opportunity. Captain, surely you've experienced some difficulties. Well, the learning curve was steep, Reed admitted, but that's true of any new environment. The key was approaching the situation with the right attitude. Instead of seeing Korath Prime as hostile, we've learned to see it as protective. The planet has incredibly sophisticated systems for identifying and eliminating threats to its ecosystem. But once we proved we weren't a threat, that we were actually beneficial, those same systems began working to help us. Beneficial? Vex could barely form the words. Absolutely. Our presence has actually stabilized several environmental systems that were in flux. The electromagnetic storms have decreased by 40% since we arrived. Mineral extraction activities have improved water table flow. And our agricultural experiments are producing food sources that native species are incorporating into their own diets. Reed paused as if considering his next words carefully. Ambassador, I wanted to thank the Council for this opportunity. Korath Prime is everything we hoped for in a new home. In fact, we've been contacted by several other human colonies requesting permission to establish similar settlements on other Class 15 worlds. The transmission ended, leaving Vex staring at a blank screen. In the silence that followed, he could hear the quiet hum of his ship's systems and the distant sound of Kess updating the colony status files. "Sir," Kess said finally, "what should we report to the Council?" Vex looked at the monitoring screens one more time. Human children were playing in gardens filled with plants that could kill most alien species. Human adults were working alongside creatures that had been classified as apex predators. 6 months after landing, Dr. Stone stood at the edge of what had once been called the Dead Valley, a barren stretch of land where even Korath Prime's hardy predators had refused to venture. Now it bloomed with strange, beautiful plants that glowed softly in the perpetual twilight of the planet's storm-covered sky. "The transformation is remarkable," she said into her recording device, walking carefully between rows of cultivated alien flora. What we initially classified as dead soil was actually a complex mineral matrix waiting for the right catalyst. Human agricultural techniques combined with local biochemistry have created an entirely new ecosystem. Behind her, Farmer Liu tended to his crops with the same care he'd once used for wheat fields back on Earth. The plants he grew now would have been impossible to imagine 6 months ago. Hybrid organisms that combined human agricultural knowledge with Korath Prime's natural adaptability. "Dr. Stone," Liu called, holding up a fruit that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "The energy melons are ready for harvest. Mills wants to test them in the new power generators." Dr. Stone accepted the fruit, marveling at its warm weight. The energy melons were perhaps humanity's greatest breakthrough on Korath Prime. Living batteries that could store and release electrical power with 95% efficiency. A single fruit could power a human dwelling for a week. "Liu, how many of these did your fields produce this month?" "About 3,000, Liu replied casually. "And that's just from the test plots. Once we expand to the full valley, we're looking at maybe 50,000 per month." Dr. Stone smiled. 50,000 energy melons per month would be enough to power a city. Back on Earth, such technology would revolutionize civilization. Here on Korath Prime, it was just one of dozens of innovations the colonists had developed, by working with their environment instead of against it. In the settlement's expanded communication center, Torres was fielding the 5th request for immigration that day. The calls had been coming in steadily for months. Humans from colonies across the galaxy who wanted to relocate to what had become known as the Miracle World. "New Shanghai Colony. This is Korath Prime," Torres said into her headset. "Yes. We're still accepting new residents, but I have to warn you about the application process. It's not as simple as just showing up." The voice on the other end was eager, almost desperate. "We understand there are challenges, but we've heard about the opportunities, the resource extraction, the new technologies, the quality of life improvements." Torres looked out the window at the thriving settlement. The original 500 colonists had grown to over 2,000 people, with more arriving every week. But not everyone who came to Korath Prime succeeded. The planet still demanded respect, adaptation, and the right attitude. "The biggest challenge isn't the environment," Torres explained patiently. "It's changing how you think about the environment. Korath Prime doesn't just test your survival skills, it tests your ability to become part of something larger than yourself." This was the lesson that had taken months for even the humans to fully understand. Korath Prime wasn't hostile to all life. It was protective of its own ecosystem. Species that tried to dominate or exploit the planet faced its wrath. But species that learned to contribute to the ecosystem's health and balance found themselves welcomed and supported. The failed alien expeditions had approached Korath Prime like conquerors. They'd brought weapons to fight the wildlife, machines to reshape the landscape, and shields to protect themselves from the environment. Every action had marked them as threats to be eliminated. Humans had initially made the same mistakes. But their natural adaptability had allowed them to recognize the pattern and change their approach. Instead of fighting the planet, they'd learned to dance with it. Captain Reed walked through the settlement's newest district where human architects worked alongside native crystal formations to create buildings that seemed to grow from the planet itself. The structures were more beautiful than anything he'd seen on Earth, organic curves that channeled wind and rain into power systems, walls that filtered air and regulated temperature naturally, foundations that actually strengthened the ground they were built on. "Captain," called Engineer Mills from the construction site of their newest project, "you need to see this." Reed approached the foundation dig, where Mills and his team were working on what would become Korath Prime's first industrial complex. But instead of the usual concrete and steel construction, they were cultivating specialized organisms that would serve as living machinery. "We've successfully bred the processor colonies," Mills explained, pointing to what looked like a pool of shimmering metallic liquid. "These organisms can break down raw ore and separate rare minerals with 99.7% efficiency. No heat, no toxic waste, no energy consumption beyond basic feeding." Reed stared at the pool of living metal refiners. "How long until full production?" 2 weeks for the first line, maybe 6 weeks for full industrial capacity. "Captain, when this gets out, every mining operation in the galaxy is going to want this technology." But Reed was thinking about more than just mining. The implications of truly biological technology, organisms that could manufacture, process, and refine materials without the industrial pollution that plagued most civilized worlds, would change everything. Not just for humans, but for every species in the galaxy. "Mills, I want you to start documenting everything. Full technical specifications, breeding protocols, care and feeding requirements. Make sure we can teach this to others." Mills looked surprised. "Sir, this technology could give humanity a massive economic advantage. Why would we share it?" Reed looked out over their thriving settlement, where human children played alongside alien creatures in perfect harmony. "Because that's not what Korath Prime has taught us. This planet doesn't reward greed or competition. It rewards cooperation and balance. If we try to hoard these innovations, we'll be acting like the old alien expeditions that failed here." In the observation ship, Ambassador, Vex read the latest intelligence reports with growing alarm. The humans on Korath Prime weren't just surviving. They were thriving in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. "Economic projections show that Korath Prime will be the most productive world in 3 sectors within a year," reported his aide. "Their resource extraction rates exceed anything we've seen, but with 0 environmental damage. Their agricultural yields are impossible by conventional standards, and their technological innovations—" "I can read," Vex snapped, but his anger was directed at himself as much as the situation. Every projection the Council had made about humanity's failure on Korath Prime had been wrong. "Sir, we've also detected unauthorized Council species attempting to establish their own settlements on Class 15 worlds. 2 Vrex expeditions, 1 Zephyrian research team, and a Kresh mining operation. All of them citing the human success model as justification." Vex felt his stomach clench. If other species started successfully colonizing death worlds using human techniques, the entire balance of galactic power would shift. The most valuable real estate in the galaxy, the resource-rich, worlds that everyone had written off as uninhabitable, would suddenly become the new centers of civilization. And the results of those expeditions? The Vrex lasted 3 days before evacuation. The Zephyrians made it a week, but lost half their team to environmental hazards. The Kresh. The aide paused. "The Kresh are still trying, sir, but their casualty rates are approaching 60%. Of course they were failing." Vex understood now what he'd missed before. The humans hadn't succeeded on Korath Prime because they were tougher or more advanced than other species. They'd succeeded because they'd approached the challenge with a fundamentally different mindset. "Sir," the aide continued quietly, "there's something else. We've been monitoring communications between human colonies. They're planning to establish settlements on 12 more Class 15 worlds within the next 2 years. 12 more worlds. If humans could replicate their Korath Prime success even half as well on other death worlds, they would control the most resource-rich territories in the galaxy within a decade." "Contact the Council," Vex said finally. "Request an emergency session. We need to discuss revising our approach to humanity." As his aide hurried away, Vex looked one more time at the screens showing the human settlement. What had started as 500 desperate colonists had become a thriving city of over 2,000 people. Their buildings gleamed in harmony with the alien landscape. Their children grew up speaking both human languages and the chemical communication methods of native species. Their scientists had made breakthrough discoveries that would advance galactic knowledge by centuries. The punishment that was supposed to humble humanity had instead given them the keys to galactic dominance. Vex had the uncomfortable realization that the hunters had become the prey. The Galactic Council had thought they were setting a trap for humanity. Instead, they had trapped themselves. 1 year after landing on Korath Prime, Captain Reed stood in the Grand Council chamber of what had once been an impossible dream. A thriving human city built in harmony with one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. The chamber itself was a marvel of bioengineering. Its walls formed from living crystal that pulsed gently with stored energy from the planet's lightning storms. Around the circular table sat representatives from 12 different human colonies, all of them eager to learn the secrets of Korath Prime's success. But Reed's attention was focused on the large viewing screen that showed an incoming council ship, the first official visit from the Galactic Council since the colony's establishment. "Captain," said Dr. Stone, entering the chamber with a thick datapad in her hands. "The final numbers are ready for the council presentation." Reed accepted the pad and scrolled through the statistics that told the story of humanity's transformation from galactic newcomers to a major power. In 12 months, Korath Prime had gone from an empty death world to the most economically productive planet in 3 sectors. Population: 5,847 humans, with immigration requests backlogged for 18 months. Resource production: 340% above galactic. Average for similar-sized colonies. Technological innovations: 67 major breakthroughs including biological manufacturing, living energy storage, and symbiotic construction methods. Environmental impact: net positive. The planet's ecosystem was healthier than it had been in centuries. Most importantly, Dr. Stone added, we've had 0 major accidents, 0 environmental disasters, and 0 conflicts with native species in the past 6 months. Korath Prime isn't just supporting human life, it's actively helping us thrive. Reed looked out the chamber's massive windows at the city beyond. Human children played in parks where carnivorous plants had learned to provide shade and protection. Human workers collaborated with alien organisms in factories that produced goods without pollution. Human artists created sculptures that incorporated living materials, creating artworks that grew and changed over time. "Any word from the other Death World colonies?" Reed asked. "All successful," Dr. Stone replied with obvious pride. "New Titan colony on Hellforge Prime is already extracting rare minerals using the biological processes we developed here. The Stormbreak settlement has found ways to harness planetary electrical systems for unlimited clean energy. And Deepwater Colony has established the first underwater human city, using symbiotic relationships with aquatic predators." Each success story represented the same pattern. Humans approaching impossible environments with curiosity instead of fear, adaptation instead of domination. Where other species saw death traps, humans saw opportunities for partnership. Ambassador Vex stepped off the council transport shuttle, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. The year since the human experiment began had been the most humiliating of his long career. What was supposed to be a simple lesson in humility had become a disaster for the established galactic order. The human settlement that greeted him was unlike anything in his experience. Instead of the typical colonial outposts, sterile domes and defensive barriers, he saw a city that seemed to have grown naturally from the planet itself. Buildings curved and flowed like living things. Gardens bloomed with impossible beauty. The very air hummed with energy that felt both alien and welcoming. "Ambassador Vex." Captain Reed approached with a warm smile and an extended hand, the human gesture of greeting that Vex had learned to expect. "Welcome to Korath Prime. I hope you'll find your stay enlightening." Vex accepted the handshake, noting that Reed's grip was firm but not aggressive. This was confidence, not hostility. "Captain Reed, I must admit your settlement is more extensive than our intelligence suggested. Intelligence? Reed laughed, a sound that Vex found oddly comforting despite himself. Ambassador, we've been sending detailed reports to the Council every week for a year. Nothing here is secret. In fact, we've been hoping the Council would visit sooner. We have so much we'd like to share. As they walked through the settlement, Vex found himself constantly surprised. Children of multiple species played together. Not just human children, but young aliens whose families had requested permission to live in the human settlement. Markets sold goods that represented fusion of human innovation and alien biology. Artists from across the galaxy had come to study the new forms of living architecture. This wasn't what we expected, Vex admitted. Reed nodded thoughtfully. I imagine not. When you sent us here, you were thinking like conquerors. You assumed we'd try to dominate this world, and when that failed, we'd either die or flee. But humans don't think like conquerors, Ambassador. We think like partners. They stopped at an observation platform that overlooked the city's industrial district. Instead of the smokestacks and pollution that marked most galactic manufacturing centers, Vex saw gentle organic structures that seemed to breathe with the planet's natural rhythms. How? Vex asked simply. We listened, Reed replied. Every world, every ecosystem, every environment has its own needs and patterns. Instead of trying to impose our will, we learned to work within those patterns. Korath Prime didn't want to kill us. It wanted to test us. Once we proved we could be beneficial partners rather than destructive parasites, everything changed. In the Council Transport's Communication Center, Vex composed the most difficult report of his career. Around him, his staff worked quietly, all of them understanding the implications of what they'd witnessed. The humans have not simply survived on Korath Prime, he dictated to his recording device. They have transformed it into the most successful colony in recorded galactic history. More significantly, they have developed technologies and techniques that render our current understanding of planetary classification obsolete. He paused, looking out at the human city through the transport's windows. Even from orbit, he could see the gentle glow of energy systems, the organic flow of transportation networks, the integration of natural and constructed elements. The humans are currently planning to establish settlements on 47 additional Class 15 worlds within the next 5 years. Early reports from their existing Death World colonies suggest success rates approaching 100%. If these projections prove accurate, humanity will control the most resource-rich territories in the galaxy within a generation. The political implications were staggering. For millennia, the Galactic Council had been built on the assumption that Class 15 worlds were uninhabitable. Entire economic systems depended on the scarcity of resources that could only be safely extracted from less dangerous planets. If humans could successfully colonize and develop death worlds, they would control resources that dwarf the combined wealth of all existing Council species. Furthermore, Vex continued, the humans have expressed willingness to share their techniques with other species. They have already begun accepting non-human residents in their settlements and have offered to provide training and support for other species attempting Death World colonization. This was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire situation. Instead of using their advantages to dominate other species, humans seemed genuinely interested in cooperation and mutual benefit. It was an approach to galactic politics that none of the Council species had anticipated. Captain Reed stood in the same landing zone where the first human shuttles had touched down 1 year earlier. The scorched earth and acid-scarred rocks had been replaced by a beautiful garden where human children played alongside young creatures that would have terrified the original colonists. Beside him, Ambassador Vex prepared to board his transport, back to the Council chambers where he would deliver his report. The ambassador's silver skin had lost some of its metallic sheen, and his dark eyes held a thoughtful expression that hadn't been there when he arrived. Captain, Vex said as his shuttle prepared for departure, the Council will likely offer humanity a formal apology for this experiment. They may also offer relocation assistance to move your people to more suitable worlds. Reed smiled and shook his head. Ambassador, with all due respect, we're exactly where we want to be. Korath Prime isn't our punishment. It's our home. And as for more suitable worlds, he gestured at the thriving settlement around them. I can't imagine anywhere more suitable than this. Vex nodded slowly. The council also wanted me to ask about your expansion plans. There are concerns about humans claiming too many death worlds too quickly. No claims necessary, Reed replied. Easily. Any species that wants to learn our methods is welcome to try. We'd be happy to provide guidance and support. The galaxy is big enough for all of us to find suitable homes. As Vex's shuttle lifted off, Reed remained in the garden, watching alien children chase butterfly-like creatures that glowed in the perpetual twilight. Around him, the city hummed with the quiet energy of successful partnership between human innovation and alien environment. The Galactic Council had thought they were teaching humanity a lesson about their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, they had accidentally given humans the tools to reshape that hierarchy entirely. But perhaps most importantly, they had discovered that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their adaptability or their persistence or their technology. It was their ability to turn enemies into friends. Gaich.